Fluttershy gets replaced by a Sherman tank. By Easty. Fluttershy was pacing back and forth in the front of her cottage. It was a mere 3 hours before the bearers were supposed to leave Ponyville, taking on their latest mission, which any princess could have wrapped up themselves within, say, 12 seconds, but simply couldn't be bothered to do so for reasons you were never supposed to ask about, because it was the princesses, and so no pony ever asked. At least not twice. And she was frantic and nervous and scared and worried and all other sorts of things, which would mean still more uses of conjunctions in a single pointless run-on sentence because, you know, Fluttershy. Also, she was pacing due to all of the above, and it was pacing instead of flying in circles because we're still with Fluttershy. Seriously, all you have to do is learn to pay attention when you're reading this sort of stuff. Just try to keep up! So anyway, here we are with Fluttershy, and it's 3 hours before the bearers need to go on a mission. I thought we'd recap that for you, just in case. There were numerous animals staring at her as she steadily worked her own mini-groove into the dirt. Several of them were waiting for them to stop, so that they could claim it as their own personal territory. For many yards away, fish glanced up from the stream and contemplated the glory of conquering another portion of the loathed land if they could just splash a whole lot of water over there, that far, with total accuracy, and then reach it without suffocating! Which was a minor hitch in most of the Grand Prasine General's plans. Ones which dozens of loyal soldiers had perished during their attempts to never quite prove that if fish simply wanted to badly enough, the air itself would bow to their will and submit to breathing. There was something the General himself strangely refused to field test on his own, and no fish asked him why. At least, not twice. But that is another story entirely, and if you're very lucky, no one will ever tell it. So, where were we? Oh right, yeah, Fluttershy was pacing. A lot. And right on cue, because something has to get the story moving, and it's clearly not going to be the author. Twilight Sparkle came galloping up the road. Fluttershy, are you ready to go? The unicorn, who must be described as such immediately, just to see how many readers at a noise, inquired. Incidentally, she was Lavender. Sure, you might think that we've still got 3 hours left before departure time, but this is the point in my checklist where it says that I'm supposed to harass you in some seemingly random fashion, just to make sure that you're living up to the standard of punctuality which can normally only be found in better mental institutions, which I am extremely familiar with, and don't ask why. I just need to make sure that all the ponies are running on time. And of course, since we're about to face death, and doom, and destruction, and discord, and lots more things requiring excessive conjunctions, I thought you might be hiding somewhere, and I'd need extra time to find you, as you're a lovable coward, whom I'm totally never had a single most minor fantasy about, and I'm going to stop this sentence right here. Which he did, staring at Fluttershy with bright, expectant eyes, where the state of pupils in no way indicated a lurking nervous breakdown looking for a place to happen, at least no more so than usual. Fluttershy, perhaps aware on some level that this was not originally meant to be a 10,000-word story, did her part by weakly saying, "I can't go." Twilight glanced at her list and proudly stated, 2 hours and 59 minutes before departure. Fluttershy says she can't go. Right on schedule. Do you know how cute you are when you're totally predictable, orderly, and punctual? Oh, I could just lock you in my basement and do all sorts of experiments on you, which the princesses would never learn about. So, why can't you go? She finished the sentence with the first blink of the last 10 minutes. Yes, we weren't watching her for that much time. Just have a little trust. I can't find any pony to fill in for me. I thought I could get Snowflake, but he's stuck in Canterlot. Something about some pony misfilling an official change of name form, and now he's not going to live under something alliterative, especially when he's not even sure that ponies have biceps. Really, and no pony else wants to work here. Not after what Angel Bunny did last time, and the time before that, and the time before that. Twilight looked confused, which made her seem briefly less psychotic. I thought all the charges were dropped. Yes, but now the guards are looking into new ones for witness intimidation. Oh, they're just being silly, Twilight sniffed and dismissed at the same time, because when it comes to multitasking, she's just that good. Ponies are found hanging off things all the time, especially around this continuity. This is happening in the local continuity? No, but there's this little voice in my head which told me to say that, and since it seemed much more incessant than all the other little voices, which the princess told me not to pay any attention to, I thought I'd just give it a minute. So, you really can't find any pony to fill in? No, and I can't leave all my friends here by themselves, or they might, stampede, or get into the garden, or start eating each other again, or, every pony else might. Twilight paused, flipped over all 59 feet of the checklist, and jotted down an idea for a really great grimdark fanfiction, which she was definitely going to get around to right after she finished the one where she got to sleep with the entire town, all at the same time, which would include sleeping with herself. Honestly, how had no one ever seen all the erotic uses for the mirror pools before this? She would never know. But we need you. We can't make the rainbow of Totally Not Death without you. How stupid would a rainbow be? And look, if it only had 5 colours. Don't rainbows have 7 colours? Indigo doesn't count. So you have to come. It's mandatory. It's not a bearer's mission without 6 ponies. And it's not as if all the wild pollen blowing out of the other 3 is going to stop causing allergy attacks all by itself. Pollen must be regulated. Random movements of tiny particles shall be predetermined. My quota of exclamation marks per month has been met. But if no pony can watch them, and there's this rumour of carnivorous ponios, but that's really someone else's story. Fluttershy waited it out, which is the same thing the readers are doing during the sentence. Character empathy, Twilight's Warhoos made a snapping noise, which is really quite an impressive achievement when you think about it, and thankfully, no pony did. I've got it! I know just what to do! I always know just what to do at some point, and maybe that's usually in the last 2 minutes, but I've really grown as a character. I'll be back just in a little while. You wait here through the scene break hyphens. She galloped away. And so Fluttershy waited patiently while staring down at the scene break hyphens because Twilight told her to, and the stupid writer hadn't figured out how to use a formal HTML break code yet. 27 hyphens sitting on the wall. 27 hyphens sitting on the wall. If some pony knocks off one of those hyphens, there'll be 26 hyphens sitting on the wall. Fluttershy had counted the scene break hyphens several times now. There were 27 of them, which was significantly less than she was usually forced to put up with. Apparently, the writer was also too rushed with getting through this ridiculous story idea to cut and paste anything longer, but counting them was pretty much all there was to do between scenes anyway, unless she wanted to count all the other things she liked to do off camera, most of which would require Angel Bunny to dispose of any surviving witnesses. And how confusing is it to have counting this many times in one sentence anyway? Fortunately, that was when Twilight came back, because the story was counting on her to do so. I've got it! Twilight said, her field surrounding a huge metal object which trailed off at some distance behind her, the range of which was not being measured in pony body lengths, because let's face it, much like this annoying reliance on the word field, it will never catch on. And the metal object was there because did you happen to see the title of the story when you came in? Twilight, what is that? Fluttershy asked, actually managing to justify her overused trademark ellipse for now. It's your new substitute, Twilight proudly declared, while her pupils performed dilation tricks usually reserved for black holes. It can do everything you can do. It can supervise your animals. It will deal with your pet sickness. When customers show up and refuse to pay their bills on time, it won't be able to say anything either. I'm pretty sure it can even stare. And much like every pony who's ever been introduced, some pony will be able to rewrite it as a serial killer when no one's looking. It's perfect! But it's a Sherman tank. And it was, because this was the part of the story title, and Fluttershy, who had been through this sort of crack-fic thing far too often, had been sure to pay attention when she came in, which probably put her ahead of whatever readership percentage you'd find personally insulting. Twilight was surprised, along with being somewhat offended, because knowing all about the most obscure stuff ever, especially when no pony had any real way of being informed at all, was kind of her thing. How did you know that? Fluttershy pointed at the title space. Oh, but you don't know anything about Sherman tanks. The tiny pupils would have almost gleamed if their current density hadn't prevented light from escaping their gravitational field. Just the name, and that doesn't really look like something which could take over for me. But it was too late. Twilight had been told a pony didn't know something, and so the 158-foot-long checklist was unfurled. The unicorn, just in case you'd forgotten what she was during the time passage, because this is a lot longer than you were figuring on, isn't it, began to read off the precisely ordered set of facts, ones concerning the Second World War and European military movements, historical comparisons with panzer units, a bit about the Afrika Korps, and even found time to diverge into a brief biography of William Sherman, which, unlike the author, she had in no way pulled off Wikipedia 5 minutes before leaving the tree. The lecture went on and on, for enough time to allow 15 commercial breaks and the postponement of 2 new episodes, concluding with the traditional administration of CPR to all listening parties, which didn't really do much for the fish. But how is it supposed to substitute for me? A weak Fluttershy protested, for the first bits of oxygen her brain had recognised in nearly 4 minutes. It doesn't matter! Why not? Because I deliberately made the lecture so long that we have to leave in 2 minutes. So now there's no time to find any pony else. I am a pony of plans! Can you imagine if I had ever turned all this intellect and strategy to the cause of evil? Yes, but Twilight, how is any pony supposed to know the Sherman tank is my substitute? Twilight frowned. You know, every pony else in this town does seem to be exactly as stupid as the plot requires. Maybe I'd make it obvious. She utilised one of the 1,780,000,000 spells by actual count which this fanfic's writer had given her over the years, none of which did anything with pollen and solved Fluttershy's last remaining issue on the spot. The Sherman tank now had a sign hung over the end of its barrel which read, "I am the new Fluttershy!" See? Twilight beamed, instantly pulling all of the chickens closer with the sheer intensity of her total sanity. Problem fixed! And Fluttershy said, that'll do. Because the plot was telling her to do so, and frankly, we've used up way too much time setting this thing up already. The ponies ran off to their mission. The tank rested on the soil in front of the cottage, being a tank. 26 hyphens sitting on a wall. 26 hyphens sitting on a wall. If you put another hyphen back onto the wall, there'll be 27 hyphens on the wall again. 27 coat dust hyphens worth of time passed, which is about as much time as you want it to be, without going into early afternoon, because the tank was dropped off pretty early in the morning. No one mentioned that earlier? Too bad. The tank continued to rest in front of the college. It was green, it was metal, it was a classic. It was the sort of thing people park in front of their VFW headquarters. Because, you know, Christmas trees are once a year, but you just try telling someone they've got to take down their tank. It looked somewhat haunted, which is silly. A haunted tank? Yeah, like anyone's gonna get a story out of that. Several of the animals had approached it. This had required the death of 5 fish, which were written off as scouting casualties, but were in no way the fault of the general. Just like all the other deaths, the slightly more air-breathing residents of the cottage had investigated via sniffing, tasting, and, because they were animals and certain things had to be done, urinating on it. The tank had not scolded them for any part of that, which put it ahead of Fluttershy, and so now they loved it more than they had ever loved her, and would continue to do so until their limp memories ran out, 15 seconds after it was taken away. But until then, it was going to be a really sincere love, especially since pretty much all of them had forgotten she existed 12 seconds after departure. She just wasn't as memorable as the tank. A particularly stupid teenage dachshund had decided that the tank was a female, but he was in love with it. However, since the story is going to be humming along and a teen racing, what he did with this completely rational canine logic leap will pretty much have to stop right here. But if you really want to know, you can post in the comment section and someone will probably tell you where he found the nicotine after that. Now a tank sitting in front of the cottage all day is going to be a little too calm for a proper crack fig. So, something clearly needs to happen here. Now let's see, what could that be? Certainly, don't want to use Angel Bunny just yet, do we? That's really the sort of thing that should be reserved for later in the story. So for now, let's get another pony in here. Well, since the bearers are all off fighting the dangers associated with drifting pollen, but not Ponios, because that's being left for someone else in the comments section, and that will be furious enough. It can't be any of them. Also, believe it or not, despite all prior evidence, the writer is not stupid enough to give the Cutie Mark Crusaders the tank. This may be a crack fic, but there are limits. Or so you may think, because we've probably got a few of those left to violate horribly. But Scootaloo plus tank equals null. Mercy! So who can we bring in? Well, clearly it has to be a pony who can act in an idiotic way that the story requires without anyone questioning it. And that's after everything that's happened up until this point. Say, ponies without a whole lot of characterization. Just about a name only victim number 1. Oh, and he has to be really stupid in this along with turning into a major jerk. Just because the story says so. So any objections to Caramel? Too late! So here comes Caramel up the path. He was sniffing the air because it lets us change the tenses in the middle of the sentence, which is truly a sign of a best in literature everywhere. Also, if you've never smelt a Sherman tank, after numerous animals have urinated on it, and practically idiotic dachshund, who could normally only be called Dashy, but gee, let's not go there with this image, had asked it out, yeah, let's go with that, then obviously you've never walked in front of your local VFW headquarters. It has the scent of all of its own, which you must inhale to really appreciate. And you will appreciate it for 7 months, or until you stick a red hot poker up each nostril, whichever comes first. Caramel stopped in front of the tank. He read the sign, so Caramel can totally read. He read the absolute living Tartarus out of the sign. He could have read it 1,000 times in a row and found something new to appreciate each time. Caramel, just that kind of pony. Of course, he didn't understand any of what it read because the story requires him to be incredibly stupid, plus a major jerk. So, for the sake of the story, he decided that the sign meant Fluttershy had been turned into a tank, which didn't bother him at all because of all the plot. About this bill you sent me, he angrily said, whipping a piece of paper out from the mysterious place all ponies without saddlebags keep everything. Do you know how many bits you're charging me? Do you know how much these bits are worth? Because frankly, it's been confusing me for a long time. It's like being a 10th bit short is an arrestable offence. And I don't even know why I said that, but just because the real vet in town, whom the author named, and that's never going to catch on either, would charge me 3 times this rate, there's no reason for me to see your bill as reasonable and pay promptly. In fact, the purpose of the story, I am currently dating Berry Punch and taking her to bars every other night, which means I really don't have a lot of bits to spare right now. So, since you're Fluttershy, and any pony can intimidate you horribly right up until they get stared at, which is something we all seem to forget about until it's too late, I'm here to intimidate you horribly. You will take some of the cost of this bill. You will go into bankruptcy and have to leave this town. So, when my ferret gets sick again, for the purposes of the story, I have a ferret, and doesn't get better, it'll be all your fault. And I will declare all this in the name of getting some pony drunk night after night to think I'm worth hanging around. Because I'm truly stupid, a major jerk, and like to speak in ridiculously long paragraphs. The tank rested on the soil in front of the cottage, being a tank, because it knew that not only was repeating sentences from earlier a dramatic literary trick, but using cut and paste was just so much easier than having to think of an original way to re-describe something. It did not stare at Caramel because it was a tank. It also did not reorient its barrel so that it was seeming to look at him with a single dark eye. Because it was a Sherman and aiming towards any real degree of low wasn't necessarily in its design plans. Not that the author could really be bothered to read that deeply into the Wikipedia article, because this is a 3-hour crack fic which doesn't seem to mandate any real research. Plus, have you seen that thing? It goes on forever, much like this previous paragraph. But for all intents and purposes, let's just say that Caramel was standing in a place where it felt as if he was looking at him already. because that would be part of the stupid thing. And let's face it, this story needs all the help it can get. I'm not going to pay this whole thing, Caramel insisted, staring into the black hollow as best he could, which wasn't very easy. The tank said nothing. I refuse to hand over bits when I know that you don't have the guts to take me to court over them either. Plus, if anything had happened to my ferret, I would have adopted a new one from you for free, which logically means that the medical treatment also should have been free. The tank maintained a certain dignified silence. I didn't even vote for Lunicare! The tank, realising that the comment section had just been opened to a political war for the sake of what was frankly just about the weakest imaginable one-liner, fervently wished it was in another story entirely. Caramel kept staring at the tank. The tank didn't blink, because it's a tank. They do that, or, not. There was a long pause, one which a much better writer would have used to build some degree of drama, but which this hack used for losing on level 168 of Candy Crush Saga another 5 times. Stupid game. Caramel took a tiny breath. I'll just leave the bits right here, shall I? The tank's silence seemed to indicate some degree of approval, or perhaps just a very large degree of being a tank. Caramel extracted bits from the same place where Bill had emerged, only this time with decidedly more grunting. He delicately placed them in front of the tank, leaving no teeth marks or scratches on the coin, because that's just how equestrian money works. If you haven't questioned that up until this point, then don't you think you're picking up a really bad place to start? And then he backed away from the cottage, keeping an eye on the tank the whole time, just in case. The tank rested on the soil in front of the cottage, being a copy and pasted sentence about the tank, and also a tank. Gosh, that's a messer. 27 hyphens sitting on a wall. 27 hyphens sitting on a wall. If you add another hyphen to the wall, you've got 28 hyphens sitting on a wall. There were 28 hyphens this time, just in case anyone was bothering to count again. The tank rested. Okay, that's about enough of that, don't you think? But it hadn't moved, because no one was operating it. The metal was heating up rather nicely. Since it happens to be summer, and since no one bothered to bring up the time of day as an appropriate juncture, we can just drop the section of the year in whenever we want to. Even if the pollen might be more suited to spring. In Equestria, the clouds have to be moved by hoof, and you're going to ask questions about allergy season. Now, you may think that a tank sitting in front of a cottage being mistaken for Fluttershy by ponies who are exactly as stupid as the story requires them to be is a situation rife with comic potential. And you're probably right. However, your skills also happen to be superior to the writers who's working with this idea. So, while you could do so many things with it, none of them are going to happen here, because we're going to kind of skim over the next few hours to get to much closer to what's being falsely seen as the good parts. Also known as Picking a Delusion, which will wrap up this writing in about 3 hours. Bear with it, let's face it, if you're still reading this at this point, you're not in much of a position to judge. So, with that in mind, here's a few highlights from the day. Big Macintosh, very well aware that a good part of this fandom considers both he and Fluttershy to be A, heterosexual, B, attracted to each other, and C, in desperate need of getting started already. Pick this, of all days, to finally work up the courage to trot to the cottage and ask the object of his 2 AM nightly ventures into the mature section out on a date. Which meant he asked out a tank. At least after he finished clearing away the defensive Dachshund. Now, in a different story, he would have recognised that the tank was there because Twilight was insane and decided to come back another day. In an extremely different story, we would have gone into hot pony on tank action, which is the point, which at this point, under the summer sun, would have resulted in some really awkward burns. There will probably be fan art of this by lunchtime, therefore no one should plan on eating lunch ever again. Okay? Okay. And in far too many stories, there would have been a funeral because, have you seen this site? The only thing more common than serial killers are suicidal ones. Honestly, if not for the dozens and dozens of duplicate background citizens, the population of Ponyville would have hit 0 halfway through the 3rd episode. But in this particular, whatever this is supposed to be now, he simply decided that Fluttershy was clearly feeling far too skittish to accept his proposal at that time. What, with being recently turned into a tank and not understanding that he still found her beautiful. And so, he went back to the acres, deciding to try again another day, after she'd adjusted to the change a little more, and found the family farm, barn, and crop destroyed by Apple Bloom's crusading activities. Again. Which ultimately inspired him to become a serial killer, and that's another story. 3 more very stupid ponies trotted over from town to dispute their bills. Which three would you like? But they had to be stupid. Really and truly stupid. As stupid as pretty much everything in this story. Because do you really think that this threadbare excuse for a plot is going to work any other way? Somewhere, the writer couldn't be bothered to look. Rarity freaked out because there was yellow pollen in her mane, and yellow and purple was so overdone. So since this was Rarity, a total nervous breakdown, complete with mindless headlong galloping, was clearly justified. The others chased her through another patch of flowers, which turned them all into alicorns for exactly 5 seconds, thus fulfilling the fanfic quota for turning every pony into an alicorn, except for Spike, because they'd all forgotten about him again. But then they never spoke of it again once they emerged, which might have been seen by some lesser minds as a pity, because those 5 seconds cleared up every single mystery of the series. But really, we're just here for the tank. So forget it. Several small animals sprinted up the Everfree to take shelter at Fluttershy's cottage, with a number of the larger ones chasing them. The bigger creatures found themselves facing, instead of a retired supermodel who fed the bears on paparazzi, a tank. So in that sense, the replacement was exactly as effective as Fluttershy, and only fainted 1/10 as much. And it could explain those 2 times. Really it could. Or would have if it wasn't a tank. But trust the writer, it made perfect sense in the context which no one can be bothered to reveal. However, there were certain things that this tank could not do. It could spread death and destruction rather well. At least it could if anyone was at the controls. It could shield any pony within from bullets. Not that any pony was certain that bullets existed. And frankly, it was enough of a surprise to have Rainbow know what a tank was. If only she was here right now, she could have solved everything. And when it came to having Christmas lights strung all over it, the tank was the obsolete military tech grand champion of all times, having handily beaten the Civil War cannon by 16 complicated stringy arrangements to 2. But it could not comfort the animals, other than by giving them a place to urinate and mark their territory on, which was the area where Fluttershy seemed oddly reluctant to accept their love. It couldn't treat their illness, which happily didn't matter because no pony brought any sick companions with them on that day, and the cottage was completely free of all sickness. If you overlook the suicidally fanatic brook trout. Yes, that's overly convenient. What's your point? And most of all, it couldn't feed them. The cottage's residents and visitors were used to being fed. They happened to like it. They loved getting free food as much as they loved Fluttershy, or would have if they hadn't have completely forgotten her, because those seconds were long gone. Let's face it, they primarily loved her because they had taken one look at her and, as a group, realised that this was a sucker they could sponge off forever. With hunt and gather being placed in a bowl or trough, 1 faked purr equals 1 free meal. Repeat and ride until the entire Everfree was lining up for dinner. They would have loved any pony who was stupid enough to hold their eternal end of that deal, or at least until the food ran out, and then they would have looked for other sources, because, hello, animals. Now you may be wondering if any of them were starting to eat each other at this point. For the comfort of whatever's left of your sanity after getting this far, let's just say no. You can believe that if you try, can't you? No? Then try harder! But we still haven't seen one certain resident of the cottage yet, And it's probably about time we brought him in, because it's the only way to reach what the writer thinks will be the next good part. And wow, is that ever wrong? Still, keep the rabbits! Angel Bunny hopped out of the cottage. He was hungry. No pony had fed him. Oh yeah, he could have gone and got food for himself, for he was a rabbit. Food was all around him. But that wasn't the point. Eating grass requires effort. Raiding the garden meant he would have had to do something for himself. Angel's purpose in life was to make Fluttershy into an effective tool of the animal world, and that tool was a fork. There had to be salads, and there had to be cherries, and if there wasn't, then there had to be abusive behaviour, which had somehow gotten past every censor the hub had. Really, as far as he was concerned, every last bit of it had been justified, right up until the moment she'd opened that cookbook to the section on rabbit stew, and asked if he had any ideas regarding the preparation of the entree. So, that sort of thing didn't happen anymore. At least, not that you know about. Angel had not been fed, and that meant he was angry. He hopped up to the tank. He read the sign. Right, he read the sign. You got him this far, and that's the part you decided to have trouble with. Okay? And unlike any pony else who had approached the cottage that day, most of whom weren't worth writing about, he realised that this was not actually Fluttershy. And since the tank was not a Pegasus sucker who thought she was trading meals for actual emotional support, it would not be feeding him anytime soon. Or in fact, ever. It was, however, a tank. Angel hopped closer. He bounded straight up using one of those pure, amazingly vertical leaps rabbits generally pull off when no one's looking. That put him above the treads. He repeated this trick twice more, until he found himself on the gun barrel, paws wrapped around the hot metal, and he inched along its length. There may be fan art of this later. Don't eat breakfast either. Eventually, he reached the end, and then he wiggled himself into the hollow. Several minutes passed, but none of them warranted strings of hyphens. The tank, which was fully gassed up and ready to go, started up. The barrel turned, the treads began to shift, and he headed for Ponyville, intent on finding some pony who could feed the cottage's residents and smacking them around a little until they agreed to do so for what could be the rest of their otherwise very short lives. No, no one's asking you to believe Angel Bunny can operate a tank all by himself. 2 chipmunks and a pair of mice followed him in. Also a fly. I don't know why they invited a fly. I guess Ponyville will die. Except this is not that kind of story. Also, the writer really doesn't feel like describing the action as the tank rumbles through the surprisingly helpless Ponyville, spreading vast amounts of destruction, which will be completely repaired by the next story, while somehow managing not to kill, seriously injure, or even moderately dirty a single citizen. So we're just going to skip over that entirely, except to note that it was ultimately defeated by a truly heroic measure executed by Spike at great personal risk, which nobody noticed, cared about, mentioned, or ever remembered again. As usual. Hey, this thing has to have some sort of grounding in reality. And then the writer decided to switch into one of those heavy dialogue scenes which seem to turn up every so often, most at the same time, because this thing has taken 2 hours and 45 minutes of writing already. 28 hyphens sitting on a wall. 28 hyphens sitting on a wall. If you do something else to the hyphen number, a number of hyphens will be sitting on the wall. Princess Celestia looked at Twilight Sparkle, contemplating whether her royal presence in the story was truly necessary or simply designed to get a few more page views. Also, the truly inept use of hyphens was really annoying her. Fortunately, she had somebody to take it out on. Twilight, we have had this discussion in the past. I know. It was one thing when you replaced your teachers with rocks. They listened better. They didn't ask as many stupid questions about why I wanted samples of their major organs. No pony even noticed the difference for 2 years. And when you subsequently switched out your first date for a body pillow and a copy of the truly awesome crack pairings from history, I held my tongue. I still totally say Tom and Rarity are a couple. But when I came into Luna's bedroom to find a mattress occupied by a huge hunk of green cheese, I felt I had a certain duty to speak with you, to offer discipline, to cancel your Fleamco account. It's not my fault. Really? No, it's not. For all the times we saw her in the rest of the first season, a huge hunk of green cheese could have done her job better anyway. And besides, if ponies were supposed to open new accounts under false identities, then computer viruses shouldn't steal personal information. It's all the programmer's fault. Oh good, we have computers and tanks now. I was wondering, so I simply called them and asked who had ordered a Sherman tank recently. They provided the information, and do you know what else they gave me after I used certain measures which may or may not be illegal under my rule and no pony should ever ask twice? What? They told me you had ordered a stamp. That wasn't me. A stamp which read Twilight Sparkle is always right. That still wasn't me. That was some pony ordering under my false ID. I was robbed. My personal lie was stolen. Some pony is trying to frame me. It's Sombra! To be shipped to my throne room in replacement of me. It's always Sombra, or it has to be Sombra eventually. We wouldn't have done all that build-up for that little screen time. I actually feel like you might have gotten away with it if you hadn't ordered it in pink. Then there was silence, because there usually is. Really, by this point, it's a cliche. Am I going to the moon? The moon is too good for you. I'll be good, I swear. The rehab will totally take this time. You have destroyed Ponyville again. You have led to a complete short-changing of action scenes for the last time. And worst of all, you had a story with our extra alicorns, which no pony needs. It was just 5 seconds. No! Twilight Sparkle, you have finally gone too far. The punishment must be real. It must be something which will break you, in hopes that any pieces large enough to see might have learnt something. And so for your punishment, for the rest of your life, you will... No, please. And with the final seconds running out of the composition time, the ridiculously weak, final, completely wrong idea of a punchline was at last unleashed. Pre-read and edit Rainbow Dash's fanfics! At which point, this very nearly became a story about pony suicide. But let's face it, it's justified. 28 hyphens still sitting on the wall. I don't really care about the song anymore, because it's the last set of hyphens in the story, so I'm going to stop singing and wrap up the song. Yay. Ponyville was rebuilt yet again. Angel Bunny was disciplined, and then forgot about it 5 seconds later. Hyphens were pasted one last time, and Megacorp decided not to sue after they realised they couldn't prove the mice and chipmunks were thieves. Plus the fly could have been totally incidental. Twilight's new account was cancelled, and aside from the scrims which rung out from the library every single night, as the one last time unicorn discovered everything a certain Pegasus had ever written had been done in second person. Life in Ponyville returned to abnormal. Except that 3 weeks later, Rainbow Dash was replaced by a Harrier jump jet. But the writer was told a banning lurked if that was ever posted, so let us never speak of it again. Besides, that was part of George's idea. What have I become? What has this channel done to me? In the words of the immortal Chaos Sparks, I'm now going to go and hang myself. Goodbye!